Have you ever wondered why Jehovah's Witnesses interpret prophecy so differently from other Christians? And what if those interpretations are completely wrong? For over a century, the organization has constructed its identity on a rigid timeline of prophetic events, claiming to know exactly when Christ began ruling, when the last days started, and which group God is using today. These aren't minor theological details. They shape how Jehovah's Witnesses live, what they expect, and what they fear. But a closer examination reveals something deeply unsettling. The dates shift, the doctrines evolve, and yet the certainty remains unshaken. This investigation exposes the cracks beneath that carefully maintained image. It will explore the prophecies that were proclaimed, the expectations that were raised, and the consequences that followed when none of it came to pass. Because only by understanding how the system operates, and how deeply it impacts the lives of its followers, can we begin to grasp why so many are finally breaking the silence. Jehovah's Witnesses follow a very specific prophetic timeline, one that doesn't come from Scripture alone, but from a long history of doctrinal adjustments, speculative interpretations, and organizational claims. It starts with the year 607 BCE, a date not found anywhere in historical records, but essential to their calculation. From there, they arrive at 1914, the year they believe Christ began ruling invisibly from heaven. 3 years later, in 1919, they claim Jesus appointed the Watchtower as his exclusive channel on earth. And in between, failed expectations, like 1975, quietly reshaped countless lives. None of these cornerstone dates are plainly stated in the Bible. Instead, they are constructed through a series of numerical interpretations, typological assumptions, and historical revisionism. The Watchtower teaches its followers to accept these conclusions as fact, despite overwhelming scholarly and archaeological evidence to the contrary. And while most Christians view prophecy as something tied to Christ's first or second coming, Jehovah's Witnesses have built an entirely separate timeline, one that requires total trust in their leadership, not in the plain reading of Scripture. What's most alarming isn't just the originality of this timeline, it's how foundational it has become to the identity of every witness. From baptism to preaching, from literature to life decisions, everything hinges on a prophetic structure invented, revised, and rebranded over the last century. And once you realize how fragile that foundation really is, the rest begins to collapse. One of the most critical errors in the Watchtower's prophetic system begins at its very foundation: the claim that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 BCE. This date is essential for calculating the so-called Gentile times, leading to 1914. But the overwhelming consensus among historians and archaeologists places that event in 587 BCE, a 20-year difference that collapses the entire timeline. Without 607, there is number 1914. And without 1914, the claim that Christ began ruling invisibly from heaven loses all support. Then there's the doctrine of the invisible presence of Christ beginning in 1914, a teaching that has no precedent in early Christianity and no support in the actual text of Scripture. Jesus warned that his return would not be hidden or symbolic, but unmistakable and visible to all. Yet Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to believe he returned silently, and only their organization was able to discern it. This selective visibility conveniently places all spiritual authority in the hands of the governing body, not in the hands of Christ. And finally, there's 1919, the year they claim Jesus inspected all religions on earth and chose the Watchtower as his one true channel. But this claim rests entirely on organizational interpretation, not on any clear biblical prophecy. Worse, the teachings published by the Watchtower around that time, including pyramidology, failed date predictions, and bizarre doctrines, would disqualify them by their own modern standards. Yet members are still expected to believe this divine appointment occurred, and to build their faith around it. These prophetic errors aren't just theological mistakes. They've left a trail of emotional, psychological, and practical damage in the lives of countless Jehovah's Witnesses. In the years leading up to 1975, members were strongly encouraged to put aside education, careers, and even plans to have children. Many sold their homes, quit their jobs, and dedicated themselves entirely to the preaching work, believing the end was just months away. When nothing happened, there was no apology, only quiet deflection and blame placed on the expectations of the members. The emotional toll was heavy. Some fell into depression, unable to reconcile their faith with reality. Others felt deep guilt for doubting, believing they had failed Jehovah by being disappointed. Parents raised children under constant fear of Armageddon, warning them not to plan for the future because it wouldn't come. This fear-based mindset produced anxiety, stunted development, and in many cases, long-term trauma that former members are still unpacking decades later. For those who left, or even started to question, the consequences were often severe. Some were disfellowshipped and cut off from their families. Others stayed silent, living a double life just to avoid the pain of being shunned. Even today, many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses struggle with regret, missed opportunities, lost years, and a lingering sense that their lives were shaped by fear and control disguised as divine prophecy. If the evidence against the Watchtower's prophetic claims is so overwhelming, then why do they continue to teach them? The answer lies in how the organization is structured. Authority is centralized, unquestionable, and self-reinforcing. The governing body, a small group of men in New York, claims to be the sole channel of communication between God and humanity. Once a doctrine is established, challenging it becomes equivalent to challenging Jehovah himself. In that environment, even obvious errors are protected under the weight of divine authority. Members are not encouraged to investigate independently. In fact, they're warned against it. Reading outside material, exploring secular sources, or even re-examining old Watchtower publications can be seen as disloyalty. Those who question openly risk being labeled apostates, facing immediate social and familial consequences, including total shunning. It creates a culture where fear silences curiosity, and obedience replaces conviction. The continuation of flawed doctrines isn't just about stubbornness, it's strategic. By maintaining the prophetic timeline, the organization preserves its narrative of exclusivity and urgency. The end is near, keeps members active. Only we have the truth, keeps them isolated. And trust the faithful slave, keeps them dependent. Abandoning these teachings would mean admitting error, not just about prophecy, but about the very foundation of their claimed authority. And for a high-control group like the Watchtower, that's a risk they cannot afford to take. Misunderstanding prophecy isn't just a doctrinal issue, it's a form of spiritual bondage. When an organization claims to speak for God, and builds its authority on a timeline that crumbles under basic scrutiny, it traps its followers in a system where doubt is forbidden and fear is used as motivation. For Jehovah's Witnesses, prophecy has become less about pointing to Christ, and more about pointing to the governing body. But the Bible tells a different story. Biblical prophecy consistently points to Jesus as the fulfillment of God's promises, not to an institution, not to a date, and certainly not to a publishing corporation. When prophecy is interpreted through the lens of Christ's finished work, it brings peace, not panic. It frees the believer from fear, rather than binding them to organizational loyalty. And once you begin to read the scriptures for yourself, outside of the Watchtower's filters, the truth becomes startlingly clear. If you're questioning, you're not alone. There's a growing number of former Jehovah's Witnesses rediscovering the Bible with fresh eyes, and finding freedom on the other side of fear. So leave a comment below if you've ever struggled with prophecy in the organization. And if this video helped you, don't forget to like and share it. Someone else might be searching for the same answers you once were.